Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Sam Finn, and I'm Director of Newcomer Policy and Practice at Californians Together, where we are proud to partner with the California Department of Social Services in supporting the CalNEW program. Today, we're kicking off this year's CalNEW webinar series, where we bring together leading practitioners to share top strategies and resources in support of newcomer education and well-being. Right now, we're thrilled to have two leading educational partnerships with us to present on curriculum and instruction for newcomer students. Our presenters will share their models, strategies, and instructional materials, along with some resources to support teachers and the newcomers in their classrooms. So let's go ahead and get started. A quick look at our time together today. We're going to start with some background on the CalNEW program and our webinar series. We'll continue with a presentation from Oakland Unified School District and the SIFE Equity Project with some time for questions. We'll then hand over the floor to Anaheim Union High School District and Cal State University Fullerton, again with some time for questions. And finally, time permitting, we'll conclude our day with a general discussion on newcomer curriculum and discussion or instruction as a panel. So a little background now on the CalNEW program. The CalNEW program was developed by our state legislature to provide supports to socioeconomically disadvantaged newcomer youth and their families through our school system. The initiative, which is administered by the California Department of Social Services, provide grants to 21 school districts across California and is increasingly looking at ways to spread knowledge and best practices in newcomer education and well-being. And every year, CalNEW is proud to support districts and their staff who show such incredible dedication to supporting the basic needs of our students, engaging families, and developing youth academics and leadership skills. Now, later this year, we have 4 more great webinars with expert speakers on newcomer education and well-being. You can sign up with any of these on the California Newcomer Network with that link right there that is showed or on the scan. The next webinar will focus on law and legal services with a special focus on undocumented students. And that's going to feature the National Center for Youth Law, the Immigrant Legal Defense Firm, and West Contra Costa Unified School District. And we'll go to the next slide. If you have questions for our presenters, please feel free to use the Q&A feature on Zoom, which you'll find in the bottom toolbar. There will be a recording from today's session. This session is being recorded, along with slides and resources. Those will be posted on the California Newcomer Network website next week and emailed out tomorrow to everyone who registered for this webinar. So without further ado, I'm excited to turn things over to our expert speakers from Oakland Unified School District and the SIFE Equity Project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam, and all of the CalNEW community. It is such a pleasure to be with you here sharing some of this powerful work. My name is Julie Kessler, and I am the Director of Newcomer and ELL programs for Oakland Unified. Oakland Unified, having a heat wave this week, has about 34,000 students, about a third of whom are English learners, and about 3,600 of whom are newcomers. And so as we are thinking about the work that Annie's going to talk about today and how it frames, this is the context in which we were designing and building and are happy to share around our learnings from it. Annie?
Great. Thank you, Julie. Just want to emphasize that this project is a collaboration, is and continues to be. I want to give huge thanks to Sam and to CalNEW, as well as to Julie and Elma, because they were the folks that galvanized this project. It wouldn't be here without them. I also want to thank you for being here, for your interest. I'm excited to share this work. It's been a long time in coming, and to really extend it to a broader community and to have it be a conversation. A little bit about me. I started the SIFE Equity Project together with Susanna McNamara in 2020 to partner with educators and researchers, really build and explore programming and instruction that fosters meaningful participation for newcomers. Susanna and I have a long history. We've been working together for close to 25 years now. We met at a high school in the Bronx that serves recent immigrants, many of whom were SLIFE. And at the time, we were very much out of our depth. But those students planted a seed that has really become our life's work. You can see a young Susanna with the students in the classroom at that moment in time. And we went on to together be part of a team that developed the Bridges curriculum for SIFE with Developing Literacy for New York State. And through that, we know the power of strong curriculum and the power strong curriculum can have for teachers and the impact it has on students. And so to us, it's important that these resources are open source and available to share and build on. Okay.
Wonderful. So I just want to say a little bit of context, right? Annie spoke to this. This is the sense of, oh my goodness, as a school district, we are seeing increasing numbers of our students come to us as non-readers in their native language. We know these students to have a vast experience and so much brilliance. And as a system, we were saying, gosh, okay, we've got academic classes and we've got ELD classes, and there's a need for something more. And as we started talking to CalNEW districts, everybody was like, oh my goodness, what are you offering to teachers? We would have teachers come to us, be like, okay, I'm ready to accept the charge. How do I support this group of young people for whom I don't want to give them a Disney book? I don't want to give them something that's not worthy of their time. These are students who are coming to us with vast life experience and a pretty significant economic pressure that is a pull for them to be outside of their schooling experience, right? We are competing with financial necessity, and I'm paying my own rent and I'm doing all of these things. And so we really have to make school worthy of their time. And we didn't have access to resources that felt like that for the student group, right? And it's like, if you could get behind the firewall and get the Bridges curriculum, that there was such a need to say, we need to create something that's available to all teachers who are serving this population, that is modifiable, that they can make their own, and that is accessible. And that is something that takes into account for our secondary SLIFE students. They are not 6-year-olds and they are learning to read. And so how are we taking this experience of students arriving as non-readers and as teenagers and as grown people and give them a content that can support them and that can support teachers who are working hard to meet their needs without any materials to yet do that? We know that at some of our schools, they are lucky enough to have a SIFE boost class or a period of SIFE intervention. And for even more of our schools, it's like, look, they've got ELD 1 in their schedule, and that's what they've got. There is no other place that happens. And so our charge was to design something that could be used in a SIFE boost class, if you are lucky enough to have such a thing, or in an ELD class if needed. It needed to be beyond what, a Nat Geo or a Lift and Get Ready. We wanted it to be more than just language support for this group, and more than systematic phonics instruction. We know every district has, right? We're SIPs or we're UFly or we're this, and we didn't want to try to get in the middle of that. So this doesn't try to do both of those. It's designed to work alongside so that it can be useful in any district. But we wanted it to recognize that these are students for whom they are in the middle of a huge life transition, and their academic identity and their sort of sense of self as a scholar needed to be part of what we were building with and for them in that curriculum. So all of that to say, that was a little bit of sort of where we started with this. We reached out to the SIFE Equity Project and Annie and Susanna, who are the most brilliant minds out there. When you're like, oh my God, who even knows how to do this, right? These are the names that we come to. I was lucky enough to cross paths with them about 20 years ago when I was a baby SIFE teacher, and their work and sort of body of knowledge has spread so much that we said, CalNEW, this is a need for every district in our system, and with the support of CalNEW, we were able to partner together. The SIFE Equity Project met with a group of teachers from Oakland Unified, and we did some focal conversations with folks from a whole bunch of other CalNEW districts on like, what is the need? What are you seeing? What are the tools you have? What would be useful? So we had some design input for several months. And then in May, the SIFE Equity Project team came out and did a 2-day training on the curriculum for a group of teachers who are about to start teaching it the following week. We piloted it in our newcomer summer school program this summer with about 100 students and 4 teachers, and had an opportunity to really sort of pressure test it. And what is the feedback that comes up? What do we need to learn? Some revision happened, that feedback happened, and we're now piloting it this school year, as are several other districts who are here on this webinar. So as Annie talks about this body of work, just to say this came from a need from districts, it came from a need from teachers, and it was built with their input and design along the way.
Great. All right. Okay. So I want to start with the problem we're solving for. Julie already spoke to this. I want to push into that a little bit more. Just to emphasize, we're designing for the intersection of the needs of a subpopulation of newcomers, as Julie outlined so beautifully, who are in secondary school. And we believe they deserve a curriculum that respects their knowledge and experience, that respects the complex intersection. I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, thank you. Of the particular understandings and knowledge and skills they'll need to participate meaningfully in US schools. And we're also designing for teachers who bring a wealth of experience, but do not have the dedicated time to do the kind of development of differentiated resources that ensure that SLIFE can engage in the kinds of knowledge building and higher order thinking that they deserve. This is key for us, right? They're not in the back of the room doing worksheets. So in short, we've designed a thematic curriculum with resources to support teachers to differentiate. And importantly, although the curriculum does attend to foundational skills, because these are skills that this population of students needs, it should be also programmed with a developmental phonics program, which Julie also touched on. But I think that's important when we're sharing this beyond Oakland, to be clear that these should work in tandem. Okay. So I want to talk first about the students, because we can't speak to instruction without a really nuanced understanding of what students bring and what they need in the context of our classrooms. So the goal of our work is to create a pathway to meaningful participation. These students are learning English. However, the literacy, as we spoke to, that they bring in their home language varies, and their perception of what is involved in learning also varies in a school context. So when we say newcomers, we are looking at a spectrum. We are thinking about Haja, and Haja cannot take print off the page, may not know that words carry meaning, but with the right resources, she can engage in academic concepts and ways of thinking and building academic skills and knowledge that leads to graduation, because we've seen it. Then, in addition, we're designing for someone, sorry about that, like Gustavo, who falls somewhere in the middle. He's been in school, but what it means to do school looks very different. He's not been asked to interpret text. His learning has privileged more rote memorization. So there are skills and also dispositions that we need to cultivate to support his engagement and more authentic participation in our classrooms. And then also, someone like Sherfa, who can use a dictionary or Google Translate to navigate text. She may need support accessing deeper meaning from text, and also representing and communicating her thinking in more formal registers of school, as well as attention to building foundational academic knowledge in science and world history. So these are the students. This is a spectrum of students. Often we imagine that if teachers are doing their work, they're meeting the complex needs of this spectrum of diverse learners in one middle school or high school classroom. It is a heavy load. I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek because it's demanding and almost impossible for individual teachers to really differentiate across and beyond this spectrum, particularly when the guidance is the ELD standards and the grade level standards, and then most of the rest is really up to you if you're really going to meet their needs. And, you know, I would be remiss not to, to highlight that 70% of SIFE drop out, 7 times higher than emergent bilinguals without interrupted education. So we've done a good job in many places across the country, attending to the needs of multilingual learners, but we still need to do more across the board, but particularly for SLIFE. Okay. So, okay, so as I said, we're designing for the spectrum of learners. We're starting with the student, their age, their experience, and the funds of knowledge. And we're bridging to explicitly teach the ways of thinking that we value in schools. The units are thematic and driven by a culminating task. They integrate the development of academic language and content with attention to the ways that we represent and interpret knowledge in schools, in formal education. And finally, it's guided by the 5 pillars of literacy with attention to decoding and encoding, connected to the oral language that students are developing through the content. So that's the piece that we're bringing. We're not bringing the whole developmental foundational literacy, but we're really shoring that up through the oral language that students are learning. So students build the skills they need to use text to build new knowledge, which is the project of our schools, right? This is central to what we do. Oh, all right. Okay, so I just want to look a bit more closely at the curriculum we've designed to meet the students' needs. It's a year-long scope and sequence with 4 units. Unit 1 is fully developed with all teacher and student-facing resources. Units 2 to 4 include a unit overview, core text, and protocol templates. We're hoping to develop more. And we're here to share some of the details of the work so that you can consider whether it's a fit for your classrooms and your schools and your students. Okay, so a little about the components and the instructional cycle. So first, we're focused on identity. Over the years, students explore concepts of identity beginning with themselves and expanding to use that base to analyze more broadly. So first, they're starting to explore their personal identity and class identity, and then more broadly, how identity shapes the way we understand and interpret ourselves in the world. Then in Unit 3, exploring the factors that influence and cause literary characters to change and shift. And then looking how historical change makers help us understand how actions are aligned to values. And then finally, what immigrants can teach us about an evolving identity. The students. So the first unit focuses on what's my personal identity, what is my class identity, and how are we the same and different. It's fairly straightforward. The content is developed around the identities of newcomer students we've interviewed and developed authentic biographies for. We met them all, we followed them around to their favorite places, we took images and pictures of them, and then interviewed them so that we could create books that actually represent their real experience. And then through the curriculum, those are coupled with identity maps and a piece on graphing, and then finally a we poem to represent the class identity. So I'm going to give you a little taste of the culminating project. So the unit culminates in both an individual and group presentation. This is just highlights 4 of the 8 to 10 pages that are part of that culminating presentation. And we'll share a copy of that in the chat. The topics are students' background, their country, their interests, their preferences, their responsibilities. Then also a piece on class data graph that represents a piece of the class identity, and the we poem. And work around reading and writing, but also the ways that we represent knowledge, like graphing, is a key piece of the ways that we want to explicitly teach students how knowledge is represented. So that's a piece of that. And then the we poem is a way to really bring the class together, where each group is sharing a piece of the story of the identity of the class. Okay. All right. And we're jumping here into the lessons themselves. So the unit encompasses 21 lessons over approximately 13 weeks. And each lesson, you're going to have to follow me now, takes from 2 to 6 class periods. Okay. This is just a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to take you very explicitly through that over the course of a few slides. Okay. So let's look at what we mean by a lesson. So this framework is at the core of the instruction. It's called the Framework for Teaching to the Demands, but it's developed out of the work of Pauline Gibbons, who I'm sure will resonate for many of you, but created as a framework by Elevated Ed, which is Daria Witt and Michael Soot, who also may be familiar to you. And they were partners in the development of the curriculum. So at the core of this framework is the belief that learning involves apprenticeship and handover. And so a lesson happens through the 4 phases of this framework. First through schema building, then through collaborative practice that involves amplification activities, collaborative application through joint construction, and finally, independent production. So this is a learning cycle. It takes more than a 50-minute or a 45-minute class to learn, to practice, to take up new content and language, and to begin to own it. So this is the framework for how the units are constructed, but also through these iterations of apprenticeship, but also the template for the lessons themselves. So now we're going to look at this. Okay. So on the left, you have a lesson. This is lesson 4, which is aligned to the framework, to the demands. You see each of those phases there. And then on the right is what we call the pacing calendar, or lessons at a glance. Students are learning to write simple sentences about their identity. On the right, you see the lesson structured around 50 minutes so that the content for lesson 4 will span 3 days. I think that's pretty clear. We know that some teachers have 42 minutes and some have 60. So ultimately, this provides guidance so that each teacher makes some informed choices about how to chunk that lesson based on the time of their class period. Okay, let me just. Okay, and then you'll also see that this orange part is sort of, we give you the script for the first lesson. In subsequent lessons, you're bringing in a do now, depending on where you stopped and where you need to move next. And then I also want to point out that in addition to the framework for teaching to demands, we have included foundational skills, 10 to 15 minutes foundational skills lessons. This came out of our work this summer, one of the ways that we refine things. And these are inserted in the first 14 lessons to introduce students to the to phonemes and context. So, okay, and then I thought it would be helpful for you to see not only the lessons as we might write them up, but just through the lens of the tasks themselves. So here's a look at the same lesson over 4 phases. So in the schema building, students build schema by sorting images that represent who and do. And this is because this is the foundation of the simple sentence in English, right? Subject and verb. Then students match images to sentences. So they're not producing sentences yet. As part of the collaborative practice, they're matching, and they're analyzing the sentences for the who and the do. And then in phase 3, the collaborative applications, they're generating sentences based on images collaboratively. And finally, they complete an exit ticket to show they have command of the skills independently. So I hope this helps to give you a sense of how it's designed, but also a sense of the pacing in a concrete way. I think you can see how much the skills are really parsed and chunked and practiced so that they're developed very explicitly. Okay. And then a note about the way we approach phonics or foundational literacy, actually more broadly in the unit. So although the curriculum does not teach developmental phonics, it does integrate attention to foundational literacy skills, as you saw in lesson 4. So during phase 1, students are introduced to the 25 phonemes over the first 14 lessons in 10-minute chunks. In lesson 5, students read the shared text, which is about a student called Sayar. And then following that, in lessons 6 and 7, we introduce the foundational skills tasks. There's 17 tasks. So over 2 days, kids get experience with each of those tasks. So they practice them. They're learning how to do them independently. They are all the languages related to the text that they just read. So it's in their oral lexicon. And then once a week, students practice the foundational skills tasks at their own level. So the level they practice with in days 6 and 7 is level 1 to learn. Then we're placing kids in their right level and they're practicing the tasks that are appropriate for their English/reading level at the time. And this also includes reading the leveled texts based on the student biographies during this portion. But teachers can also choose to use those student biographies in any way they like. And we're trying to make it flexible. Okay, so I want to kind of emphasize as I close out the design piece here, that these pieces are working together. They're grounded in a culturally sustaining pedagogy. Another aspect that distinguishes the curriculum from a typical ELD1 course is the steps to get to each new skill are much smaller, which we're trying to illustrate here with the staircase, more parsed than you might experience in a typical ELD curriculum. And we're using a technique we call chunk model released throughout the lessons as one way to keep these steps very small. And they enable students to get sort of more of a bite-sized practice with immediate feedback before we're modeling and then releasing them where they have to apply a whole number of skills together. And of course, if you've got students with more literacy and more experience with school, you don't have to chunk the steps quite so much, right? So to some, because newcomer SLIFE students are new to English and new to reading, and in some cases new to school, they require curriculum that's chunked in incremental steps and introduces really only one difficulty at a time. Okay, so I'm gonna now just give you a little flavor for the materials, although you did get a peek already. Okay, so here are just the teacher-facing materials, an overview, you know, pacing calendar, protocol, handbook of protocols and routines, lessons at a glance, then lesson plans, individual detailed lessons, the student materials, embedded assessments, and editable instructional slides so that you can make it your own, and then culminating and formative assessments and rubrics, again, which you can use, you know, closely tied to the curriculum or in the ways that you might be designing curriculum, not design, either designing or using other curriculum. Okay, then this is a little look at the student materials. We've got these really great visual glossaries that can support students to just have access to more language than they might otherwise, right? They're visual, these are often tier 1 words. The series of texts that I talked about before, which we also have on audio, and then small group guided reading resources, and then again, you know, assessments to help you monitor progress for students. Okay. And then this is just a concrete look at some of the resources that are in our materials. And then let's see. I'm open for question. As I said at the beginning, I'm excited to share this work and to build a community together because we're stronger together and we're sharing this work as a starting point, and we're eager to collaborate and to strengthen and refine the work. If teachers, districts are interested, they can reach out to me. We really want to have folks that are active and engaged and willing to give us feedback so that we can refine what we're doing and keep the materials shared and improved.
Annie, I've been answering some of the questions as they've been coming up in the chat. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to in what ways does this differ from a standard ELD curriculum? In what ways does literacy development outside of sort of a phonics awareness program, how does the literacy access build in here differently than it might in an ELD program?
So for
yes,
me,
Jill, to your question, you absolutely can share it. I'm going to read some of these as we go.
Okay, sure. And I'm just getting into the chat. I didn't have it open. Okay, so so I think we think of literacy as often found, or a piece of literacy as foundational skills. But I think one of the things that's important to remind or to emphasize is that it's also about the academic ways of thinking that we assume kids come to by the time they get to a secondary classroom. And by that, I mean the ways that we categorize in Western formal classrooms, the ways we define. So there are a lot of activities that involve sorting and categorization. So the tasks are making those kinds of academic ways of thinking much more concrete and explicit. So that's one one way I would speak to the ways that literacy is surfaced in a more explicit way.
Great. Another question that came up in the chat was around use for multiple grade levels. While certainly this was designed with secondary students in mind, I will share we do have some teachers playing with it with their upper grades elementary students. But somebody's asking a question around elementary applicability. And for younger students, what would your advice or caution or wisdom be?
Well, so because we're designing with a secondary student in mind, you'll see that all the resources are teenage students. In fact, they're a little bit older than just high school students because they're 18 and we needed their permission. So they look 18, although, you know, in the profiles, they're a cross section of ages. So in that way, although the resources, at least in the first unit, might be useful or fine in an elementary classroom, I think, Julie, just the images are not kiddie images, right? And when you get up to the higher level books, you know, we're talking, you know, kids speak to the fact that, you know, I speak Spanish because of colonization. You know, there are ideas that they might need more background for if we're talking about lower elementary classes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know we only have a minute or two left. If anyone would like to pop any other questions, absolutely, Yolanda. It is designed for high school and absolutely appropriate for it. I see the ask about sharing the questions and answers and the resources. I will leave that to Sam and his brilliance of sharing it with this larger community. Anything else coming up for folks? We'll have hopefully a few minutes for Q&A after we've heard from our other amazing presenters in a bit, but anything else for us before we swap?
Great, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the next presentation.
And we will take some more questions on newcomer education, instruction, and curriculum in general at the very end with all of our presenters together. But we want to have Julie just introduce one more thing before we go to our next presentation. And this will be recorded and sent out to everyone.
Wonderful. Just one last note. Here in Oakland Unified, we have 16 secondary newcomer programs and newcomer integration into many, many different parts in our system. And because our numbers of newcomers and supports are big, we often get a lot of questions about our staffing models and our program design and wellness initiative and newcomer social workers and data use and all of these things. So we are keeping in line with the tradition of having an annual opportunity to have a roundtable where we bring the program managers of our newcomer wellness initiative and we bring our data folks and we do a little bit of a practice share of a whole bunch of different areas of our work. And we are having one on November 13th. It will be recorded and it will be shared out. But if you have questions for Oakland Unified and how we support newcomers, this is a great opportunity to come and ask them and be in community in a roundtable space with us. So the registration link is there. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you so much, Annie. That link is in the chat for the Oakland Unified School District Roundtable, and I can't recommend it enough. Again, all of those curricular resources that were just presented on are publicly available, and they'll be sent out in a follow-up email and platformed, and actually already are platformed on both the Oakland Unified website and the California Newcomer Network website. And I'm so excited now to present Anaheim Union and High School District and CSU Fullerton, who have done another incredible newcomer education classroom instruction partnership. And I'll turn it over to the team.
Hola, buenas tardes. Thank you, Sam. Hard act to follow, Annie and Julie, but we will try our best to follow through that. My name is, as I said, Fernando Rodriguez Baez, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues, Dr. Alison Dover and Dr. Renee Bryan, and we're going to present the program that we have designed para Anaheim Union High School District, Cal State Fullerton, and focusing on how can really work and learn from newcomer students. So, Alison, adelante.
All right, wonderful to meet you all. So we wanted to begin with sort of just the title of our program. So we're talking today about radically inclusive teaching. And part of why we think about this concept of radically inclusive teaching is a recognition of the context in which we all live and work. We have increasing plurilingualism within and beyond California, including a growing community of newcomers and new Americans. In just a moment, Dr. Bryant will talk about what that looks like in Anaheim Union High School District. But we know that 42% of California students are speaking a language other than English at home. So 2.5 million students, and yet we see pervasive monolingualism in our K through 12 schools and classrooms, as well as continuing deficit-oriented rhetoric. And so we wanted to think about how can we really do something, as Julie and Annie spoke earlier about, we need something more. And what we see is this need to shift educational policy and practice. And so the Language Explorers programs that we're going to talk about in a few minutes really represent the ways in which we do that. But we always like to begin by sort of bringing our students into the conversation. And so we thought we'd start with the voice of Mac, one of our newcomers, talking about how the world would be different if he were in charge of it. And so hopefully our volume is going to work okay. I'm going to play Mac for us for just a moment as he reads something he wrote about this work. So it looks like we lost our volume. Can we get this back on your end? So perhaps when you rebooted the slides, can we get this back up?
And maybe for our tech team, it might be if your microphone is on mute, maybe.
Walang paghahambing na base sa pisikal na
All
itsura.
right, I'll restart this one for us. Here we go. So let's hear from Mac.
Hi everyone, my name is Mac and I am a junior at Kennedy High School. The title of my poem is If I Were to Change the World. If I were to change the world, I'd cancel insult. I'd cancel unequal treatment to people. I'd even cancel karahasan at diskriminasyon na libu-libong tao ang naapektuhan. This means that I'd cancel crime and discrimination that many people are affected by. If I were in charge of the world, there would be mouths that only nice words and compliments for others would come out. There would be walang paghahambing na base sa pisikal na itsura. This means that there would be no differences that based on physical appearance. There would even be equal rights to all people, no matter what gender, age, nationality, or state of life. If I were in charge of the world, you wouldn't have to explain your flaws and the things that they do not like about you. You wouldn't have to argue with people about your ethnic race. You wouldn't have to katakutan ang kaligtasan mo o ng iyong pamilya dahil wala nang mangyayaring sigawan o away. This means that you do not have to fear the safety of you or your family because there would be no more fights that will be happening. You wouldn't even have to deal with hatred because love with each other will always prevail. If I were in charge of the world, smile in every people's faces would be my joy. And a person who always wants the best for other people and sometimes puts first the welfare of others than himself would still be allowed to be in charge of the world. Thank you.
And so our newcomers have such incredible visions and ideas of what they think our world should look like. And so we'll talk now a bit about how this project came together and the work we've done to really center the voices and perspectives of folks like Mac. And so I'll turn it over to you now, Dr. Bryant, to take us through Anaheim.
All right. Well, to give a little thank you, Allison, and thank you to our Oakland friends. Amazing program. And thank you, Sam. So yes, context is really important. So although it's called a high school district, we actually have 7th through 12th grade at our district. We have about 20 schools and just over 26,000 scholars. We serve 5 cities and we actually have 5 elementary school districts that feed into Anaheim Union. We have almost 80% of our scholars that would, in the old school terms, qualify for free and reduced price lunch. And then you can see here some of our other data points. We like to say plurilingual scholars instead of English learners, although we know our federal government, Title III still likes that term. So we have 22% here, as you can see, English learners or plurilingual scholars. And we have 67 languages spoken in our district, which we consider assets that our scholars and our families bring. And we do offer 8 world languages. They are all listed there, from everything from ASL to Vietnamese. And we're very proud of having multiple dual language immersion programs throughout the district. And we've expanded to even more. We'll be expanding to Korean in 2026. And then we're expanding to 2 other sites for Spanish dual language immersion. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And so, you know, last year we don't have 3,600 newcomers. That's amazing, Oakland. I wish we had that many, but we did have 800 last year, and we're continuing to grow. I think it's always important for us, one, to acknowledge that this work cannot be done without a supportive board of trustees. So I want to stop for a moment and give credit to our board of trustees for always supporting the work of promoting plurilingualism and promoting support for our newcomers. I also want to give credit to our superintendent, our innovative, amazing superintendent, Michael Matsuda, and our executive cabinet for supporting this work. And so this vision and mission, I think, really encapsulates our philosophy here: create a better world through unlimited you. And we know districts have missions, and it's all about college and career readiness, but we really double down on making sure that our scholars are ready. They're fully authentic in who they are. They're self-actualized and ready to fully participate in the democracy, as well as having all those soft and hard skills to be able to participate in college and career. And for a moment, if you really just take a moment to look at these core values, please in the chat, tell us what one is resonating with you as we think about work for our newcomers, our plurilingual newcomers. And put the number in the chat so we can see what's resonating with you. All right, thank you. I see 4, I see 3, I see 2. All right, they're all coming in now. Wonderful. So wonderful. They all resonate with us too. All of these really resonate in all the work for our scholars, our family, staff, and community. So thank you. And definitely making sure that education works for our scholars and not the other way around. And as Oakland talked about, it's really important that we take a systems viewpoint, and systems and working with partnerships is evidence from the 2 partnerships featured today. So building on the partnership, we came together. I'm going to talk about a little timeline in a moment, but you can see here that together we are committed to nourishing plurilingualism, and we choose that term plurilingualism because it's really emphasizing that our scholars, our families, and staff should be able to use their full linguistic repertoire, and that language is not siloed. And we really encourage translanguaging, and hopefully you saw that in the scholar sample. We also want to make sure the 5 C's are represented. They're here in this statement, and we are doubling down on critical thinking as well as civic engagement in the work that we do, and we'll show you some samples of that. The creativity, the collaboration, and again, just as Oakland talked about, making sure that our scholars can tell their stories. So here's a little timeline, and this year marks our 10-year anniversary of this partnership, and we're so excited. You can see here we started in 2016, continued on 17, 18. I'm a big believer, and when you have a good program, you need to shout it from the mountaintops. You need to nominate it for programs, because what happens is when you do that and you get some awards, you can also get some grants because you're showing success. So we won an Orange County Department of Ed award. Then the next year applied for Golden Bell, the California School Board Association award, got that. We added 8th grade because it was initially just a high school program. So we added 8th grade. And then we added Anaheim Innovative Mentoring Interns. So we had some of our own rising seniors intern as co-educators in the classroom. See, 20 to 21, as we know, something happened in 2020. And I'll be the first one to say that I said, I don't know how this amazing program, how it's going to pivot into a virtual space. But I'm so lucky to work with these 2 trailblazing innovative partners, Ferran and Allison, who said, let's do it. We could be the first. And so we pivoted virtually, and it did work out. We were able to have our virtual Summer Language Academy. And then also we had, at the bequest of our board president at the time, started Saturday Language Academy, and then went ahead and pivoted that to virtual as well. You can see here under Dr. Dover's leadership, we applied for a Spencer Foundation grant and were granted that to continue to spread this work. And then we added more interns. We had 12 educators in the classroom now. We'll talk about the model a little bit later, so you understand there's a classroom teacher, an AIM intern, an intern from Fullerton, and then also a bilingual instructional assistant, all co-educators. And then we went back in person, very proud of that. And you can see here 5 classes now with a total many educators now in these classrooms. And we'll talk a little bit about how we make sure that we're spreading the wealth of this knowledge and not keeping the same people teaching this. And then last year, again, 5 classrooms, so excited. And this year marks our 10th year. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the special opportunity that we'll have for you. I think 2 years ago, we offered a summit for Summer Language Academy, and we're excited to offer it again. And now I will hand it back to the professors.
Thank you. And so we feel like it's so important to talk about the ways in which none of the conversation we're having today happens in a vacuum. It's the result of years of sustained partnership and reciprocal partnership with Anaheim Union and also with other school districts. So since 2016, we've worked with more than 1,000 newcomer students and 100 educators in summer, Saturday, and academic year programs across 4 school districts. I know some of our other district partners are here this evening as well. And we really want to emphasize just the tremendous linguistic diversity of students that have participated in Language Explorers programs. In our typical classrooms, we'll have about 20 different linguistic communities with 6 to 8 languages spoken in the classroom. And like some of you commented on in the chat from Mac's poem, we really encourage students to draw from their full linguistic repertoire in every moment of engagement. We think not only about how do we leverage the other languages that students speak as they're connecting with academic content in English, but also how are we amplifying the voices that they already bring in? How are we thinking about the ways that we often refer to them as their plurilingual superpowers. What are the ways in which they can raise up those voices and speak with their unique perspectives and repertoires that other folks don't have access to? And so how can we really learn from one another? The work that we're presenting today is featured in a book that came out, and Mac's poem is actually published in it, along with several other poems by students who have participated in our programs. We'll give you more information about that later on, as well as some additional videos and other professional learning resources related to this project. But before we get into looking at some of the classroom examples, we wanted to talk just a little bit about some of those big goals and conceptual foundations that drive our work. And namely, our goal is to affirm, amplify, and stretch the voices of newcomer and emergent plurilingual students and communities, but also to support our teachers and districts in being more intentional about how we're learning with and from newcomers and emergent plurilingual students. So again, to sort of harken back to that goal we mentioned before, we want to do education differently. So sometimes when we talk about our programs, we say, well, they're 50% for the students and 50% professional learning for educators. It's a real opportunity for educators to think about how were we socialized into the classroom? Who do we want to be as educators? How can we learn from students? And then how can we use our professional agency to make a difference? And one of the ways we've done that is through the integration of participatory action research. So research that's conducted by teachers, but also by students who are exploring their strengths, needs, and identifying ways to effect change. And we'll give some examples of that in just a little bit. The other foundations that we think a lot about is culturally sustaining pedagogy. So not only how do we respond to the students who are in our classrooms, but how do we sustain and nourish their identities, their languaging, their priorities. Translanguaging, so like we talked about before, drawing upon our full linguistic repertoires when we're teaching and challenging that monolingualism that's so pervasive in our classrooms. So we're not seeking to move towards English only, but towards increasingly plurilingual discourse within and beyond the classroom. Some of the other things we really emphasize is that idea of emergent curriculum, so that the curriculum itself comes out of the lives and the priorities and the interests of students. There's nothing about the language explorers that's scripted. And it's, one of the things I was looking at some of the examples and the really wonderful scaffolds that Oakland was providing for teachers, and thinking about one of the questions we sometimes get from teachers when we come in is, so how am I supposed to do this? And we sit with teachers and say, okay, let's figure this out together. Let's look at how we can unpack curriculum. Let's look at how curriculum can unfold. And Fullerton will talk more about that as we move into that idea of co-creation. And then finally, we really focus on systemic impact. And so Renee touched on some of that in the trajectory she presented earlier, and we'll come back to that towards the end of our time together today to talk about just the systems that have developed as a result of this longstanding partnership, and some of the ways that that's resulted in really meaningful change within Anaheim and other districts that we work with, as well as in our own teacher preparation programs here at Cal State University Fullerton, which are different as the result of this partnership. And with that, I'll transition over to you, Ferran, to talk about what this looks like in the classroom.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Renee. That's a big question sometimes is when we develop curriculum is, ¿cómo se ve en la clase? No? I think all these wonderful projects, so I'm going to briefly explain how this looks like. But before we provide concrete examples, we have developed this framework with the 3 C's. One thing that we learned is that in order to create meaningful opportunities is that we had to build comunidad. And from comunidad, then we really scaffold towards confianza, confidence. And the final result is that the students really increase the level of complexity within their linguistic repertoire. And the 3 questions that you see at the bottom is when we work with teachers, it's not that we come with all the answers, as Alison said. It's like, here we go, the curriculum, and you will teach it, and everything will happen. We start asking them these questions. How you teachers who are committed to work with newcomers and emerging bilingual, plurilingual students, how do you build comunidad in your classroom? And one of the beauty that we have with the support of Dr. Brian is in our program, we have teachers from across all the subject areas. And we highly recommend that we have science teachers, math teachers, social studies teachers, ELD teachers from any subject area. It's not just ELD teachers or English teachers. Why? Because we want to provide this, and then everything happens. No, we have a cohesive approach to what we want to accomplish. Then the same thing is like how you effectively engage, how you build this confianza, this trust within your classroom. What are the things that you do? And then we collectively ask ourselves how we can amplify those. And definitely we will talk about it, what we call about language complexity. I think we want to challenge how is language proficiency is defined. And as Oakland is doing, and then Alison and Dr. Brian is explain is, our students already come with a lot of resources, linguistic resources. Our goal is to maintain those and amplify this, and of course, working in language competency in English. So here are some examples. To build comunidad, we start with this puzzle piece. No, so we will take longer than this. So every student takes one of these pieces and they start talking about who they are. The big question is, who am I? And then we'll go towards that. Then we have, as Oakland also presented, really intense and hard and deep conversations. So in some cases, we see the student, the newcomer students, but we don't see within. So this is kind of like the activity is like what we see and what we cannot see. And it's so important we wanna contextualize the teaching right there. Then, as we said, Alison and I, Dr. Dover and I, we develop new curriculum every single year for Saturday Language Academy, Summer Language Academy. In one of those years, we decided that we wanted to create this kind of like an ecosystem, no, a forest of knowledge. So every student kind of like was a tree, and from there developing these different pieces and identifying who they are. Right there is the students are talking and presenting. That's another component. The work that the students do is shared with their families, with la comunidad. And in the right side of this slide, in terms of building confianza, is we have these activities called micrography. I know it's so beautiful, and I will try to explain it. So these are 2 students, 2 newcomer students who participated in the Summer Language Academy. You take a picture of the students, and then everything around them is all the words that describe their story. So there's handwritten right there. So they explain who they are. And then they talk about their experiences, and finally, this is the final. One thing that Alison and I will stress when we do the professional learning for teachers is this is a work in progress. This is not a one-day progress. What you see in the right side and in the left side, it might take 2 or 3 or 4 days. So we wanted to really stress that is, yes, we will have some projects that we have to complete, but it's not that we finish a project and then we go to the next one. If the students need more time, we will take as much time as needed as if it's meaningful to go through the project. And then one thing that we really is important and that we have as Dr. Brand and Dr. Dover is this idea of plurilingualism. We create this, what we call the word wall. All the vocabulary that we have is being translated to all the languages represented in the classroom. Teachers model this at the beginning, but then it's co-constructed with the students. So every single word, we start the word in English and then we add all the different named languages. Oops. Did I do something? I don't think so, but can I go back? Okay, I will take it as a sign that I have to finish. I'm just joking. I will pass this to Dr. Dover. Okay, go ahead.
So, Farah, you want to transition here? Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay, and so as we think about, I think we're actually going to transition to Dr. Bryan to talk about the Saturday Language Academy and Virtual Saturday Language Academy and what those have looked like.
Well, Farhan, you have plenty of time to finish your part, my dear. And I was backing up the slides for you. So would you like to say anything more about the word wall and the co-construction of it? Or
Okay, briefly. I think that too often we are so obsessed, and I'm going to use this word kindly, on developing language proficiency in English. And that's so important. We don't deny that. But we want to start with all the literacy and language skills that newcomers bring to the classroom. And from there, we amplify it. Because if they go through our programs and they become monolingual, then we fail. So this is the idea, they're represented and language is part of their identity. So how we can really not just recognize it, embrace it, and include it in the curriculum. And now, pass to Dr. Bryan.
I would just say too, what's really great is you see the teachers being vulnerable and also modeling their desire to be plurilingual and also learn these words as well. So everyone being a learner in the classroom. So as I have mentioned earlier, based on the success of our Summer Language Academy, which is a 4-week academy, 4 days a week, about 3 hours a day, one of the board members, board president Al Jabbar, asked, that's not enough. He said, that's not enough. What else can we do? And so we decided that we should have a Saturday academy for newcomers. And so we started it right before the pandemic and had a few in-person classes, maybe 2. And so that's why I said that we pivoted. And so again, just like our Summer Language Academy, we this is very exciting because we have, maybe 5 teachers and 5 BIAs that can serve. So it's great to be able to expand this to every single site. So every single site can have a teacher that wants to do this. Then they also have their capacity built around this culturally affirming pedagogy. You can see here that both students and their teachers engage in innovative assets-based enrichment. They work collaboratively to affirm their linguistic repertoire, their cultural identities, exploring multiple perspectives, diverse experiences, and expanding and leveraging, as we keep saying, that full linguistic repertoire. And then sharing identities and the intersection of identities, as I believe our Oakland friends mentioned earlier, and then just making sure that they're sharing it with other teachers and school sites. And what's really exciting is when you have more and more people going through this professional learning, then they're adopting that asset-based language and they're sharing with their colleagues in their PLCs. And so you start seeing the transformation of practices. I'll pass it on.
With that idea of sort of how we think about that transformation of practices, one of the things we've really seen is that over the years, the language explorers have shifted from an opportunity for teachers to really learn about newcomer and emergent plurilingual students and students to learn about each other, to really focusing on how can we learn from our newcomer and emergent plurilingual students, and learn from them not just in ways that make us feel good because we're learning a lot about our students, but that lead us to really support them in making the kinds of changes that they want to see in their educational worlds. And so part of what we've done in 2020, as Renee mentioned earlier, we received a research practice partnership grant from the Spencer Foundation to develop a youth participatory action research project in which students went through a formal research process in order to really identify how can they use their insider knowledge, perspectives, linguistic repertoires to help to better understand and help others understand the pressing needs of their community, the assets that are most important to them and the community, and then to partner with educators who seek to work in solidarity with them to really advance change. And it's, so repeat the name of the grant. It's from the Spencer Foundation. It's what's called a research practice partnership grant. And the title of the grant was Project Learn. And we'll share in just a few minutes in the chat a website that has more information about the grant and some of the projects that came out of it. But as part of the Spencer Foundation Project Learn grant, we had several different components, one of which was youth participatory action research in the context of the Saturday and Summer Language Academies. And as part of that project, students began by thinking about some of the community issues and assets that shape their community. And teachers really worked with students to think about what is community? How do we define community? What are the things that we think of as our assets and our issues? And I love this particular image. It was created by a group of students. I know it's small to see, but using their full linguistic repertoire, there are multiple languages represented on here as they brainstormed together about what were issues and assets that mattered to them. And then this particular group decided to color code the resources and the issues that they raised. The ones that are in green are things that they felt like were always assets. And the ones that are in red were things that were always issues or problematic. And the ones in orange they felt were a little bit more complicated. They had things about them that were helpful and things that were problematic. It might be industry, it might be traffic, it might be tourism, all sorts of different things. And based upon this work, the students began to then think about, okay, here's something that's important to me. Here's something about which I have a question. How can I use my linguistic repertoire and my knowledge and perspective to learn more about it? And students went out and began to collect and analyze data about whatever community issue or asset they were focusing on. And so here are some examples of what students chose to do. Some of them conducted interviews and gathered testimonials from other students. One of the most impactful projects that came out of this particular group, at least for me, there were so many really impactful ones, but was a group of students who really wanted to focus on the ways in which dress code policies negatively affected students, and especially newcomer and emergent plurilingual students and girls who felt like they were being targeted in ways that really undermined their ability to express their identities and focus fully on school. And they went out and gathered testimony from students. They created multilingual surveys. They talked to students about their experiences being dress coded at school, and then gathered this really impressive body of resource about it. The other images you have on this slide, you have some photos down at the bottom where students were documenting things they were seeing at their school site and ways in which they were feeling like school wasn't being taken care of. There was too much trash around in certain places within the community. And they were thinking about what can we as students do to better and improve the conditions that we see every day as we're coming in towards school. We have an example of some data collection forms that students created where they were thinking about what are their questions, what are relevant forms of data that can help us learn about these ideas, and how can we use that data to better understand what's happening in our worlds. And as students went through this process, they began to develop policy proposals and communicate their ideas. And so the district hosted a district-wide forum that they invited students and family members and community members and district stakeholders to, where students presented in all of the languages that they spoke about their research projects and their proposals for change. So the students that identified issues with dress code presented those multilingual testimonials and said, we really want to be heard. And before they got back to their seats after their presentations, one of the administrators at their school site had already come up to them and said, I want you to be a part of this conversation. I want you to be part of helping us really think about dress code in our district and in our school site. We have other examples where students were identifying some of the causes that they saw for issues around trash or lack of recycling. And then they invited community members to not only give feedback and pat them on the back for doing a good job at their presentation, but to be accountability partners in making a difference. And so they invited folks to give feedback about what were the strengths of this, what do you see as your ability to help students address this issue that they've identified. And community members and district stakeholders presented those responses, again, in all of the languages that they had access to. Some district stakeholders and community members said, hey, I know this organization, I know these resources, I sit on this committee, we can take care of this, we can make an easy shift for you. We want to be your partners in that. And so students really got to see that their voices were not only important, but also they were valued and necessary for the functioning of the district and the functioning of our communities. And we could think collectively about what might this look like going forward. And so those ideas of really sitting with newcomers and emergent plurilingual students and saying, you already have a voice. Our job as educators is to help break down the obstacles and the barriers that prevent you from really leveraging that in complex ways in academic spaces. What can we do to amplify your voice? And how can you help us better understand processes and identities and ways of thinking and knowing and being that we may not have access to? And so with that, we had sort of over the summer and in the context of Saturday, students doing that youth participatory action research work. And also simultaneously, we were really focusing on our work with teachers and how can we take this really exciting work that's happening over the summer and on Saturdays and bring it into the academic year classroom. And so with the support of this grant and the amazing leadership at Anaheim, we were able to pull together a cohort of 45 teachers that we worked with over the course of a year to think about what we call braving up in the classroom. And this is that Project Learn website that will drop into the chat box. Where teachers really created disciplinary examples of what radically inclusive teaching looks like in science classrooms and social science classrooms and English language arts and world language classrooms. And we worked with them over the course of a year to think about what their questions were about their own practice as educators, how they used translanguaging in the classroom, how they thought about linguistic inclusion. And then teachers created lessons, piloted those lessons, analyzed student work, reflected on that work, and then ultimately created a series of case studies for use in teacher education and professional development settings that are all available on the website for folks to look at and play with and experiment with as we continue to stretch our collective emphases on languaging and linguistically inclusive teaching. And so some of the things that we've come to and things that we found as a result of this work are on this slide. And I will pause here. Farhan, do you want to pick us up?
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And I will try to connect this with some of the questions. Allison, you want to take a look at some of the questions that we have in the chat. I was trying to type, but I'm not as a fast typer. So yeah. Just quickly, I think we want to create this awareness. Some of the questions is, are these some of the problems that students identify have been solved? And the answer is an ongoing process. At least to say we created a space where the students can, administrators and the schools can hear their voices. Oftentimes they're really silent for newcomers as students. And the second bullet is about the disrupting of deficit narratives. In many cases, unfortunately, students are super quiet because they don't feel comfortable to share and to speak, because under the belief that they do not speak English, they cannot share. So that we try to dismantle this idea, and like teachers are the ones who have to stretch. If the students, they want to write their wipeout project in Farsi or Vietnamese and Korean, they're more than welcome, and they can go fully use the linguistic repertoire. Renee, you want to talk about some of the other bullets right here?
Sorry, I was typing in the chat, Farhan, because you said you were slow at typing, so I was doing that. Yes, I'll go from the bottom and I'll assume you didn't talk about that one. So yes, we want to make sure that, again, you know, our scholars are seen as humans who bring all of their full assets to the classrooms and valued. And we were just doing some professional learning Monday and Tuesday. And I was telling the teachers, I'm going to say, we're so lucky that they choose Anaheim Union High School District because they bring so many assets to our district. And I could see people are really embracing that viewpoint, even beyond our teachers who teach SLA and SALA. And so again, yes, I mean, just being able to work with Sam and partners like our friends, Amy and Annie and Julie, you know, being able to learn from one another. I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to come together and really rethink what our education for newcomer scholars can look like and sound like. And I love this work that we're doing because of the empowerment piece. It's empowering for our teachers to see how much our scholars can do. We know that our newcomers are a whole typology into themselves, right? So some of them do come with so much literacy. So it's great to see them learning from one another. And I'm going to stop there unless you need me to talk about that grade recovery. We can do that in the Q&A. So that teaches me not to answer questions while you're talking, Farhan.
That's okay, Renee. Just to add to this, and one thing that we would like to kind of like charge all of us is to rethink about this idea of language proficiency. I think sometimes we really narrow this to the ELD. Students can show language proficiency in many different ways across subject areas, and how we really rethink about what language proficiency means. Because as Renee said, and we have newcomers that come with literacy and language skills, it is the ideas on how is English only is no language proficiency. It's much, much bigger and broader than that. Alison, anything else you want to add here in these bullets?
Yeah, so I think I'll respond to just some of the questions we've gotten in the chat and in the Q&A about languaging. And do we do all of this teaching, and what languages are we teaching in? And as the answer is really as many as we can. Like, we encourage all faculty to draw upon our full linguistic repertoires when we're teaching. We have some of our faculty, I would say maybe 60%, 70% are multilingual educators who teach within the Language Explorers programs. We do have some teachers that were raised monolingual in English and are in the process of stretching their own linguistic repertoires. So we are constantly thinking about team teaching, really intentionally pairing teachers and bilingual instructional assistants, pre-service teachers, student interns, and then collectively working together to think about how can we convey ideas. That word wall that we looked at before was an example of how a classroom constructed meaning across multiple languages. And on that word wall image, the first few columns were things like hello, name. The end columns were things like question and observation. And that was one of the ways that as the class introduced new concepts, folks worked together to build languaging. And so we really position our students as teachers. And that's part of what we're thinking about as we think about some of these systemic elements that have made this work so successful. And I'll bring us towards, I think, the next slide. And I really just want to highlight, so in the book, so Renee was so generous in working with us to co-author a chapter on some of the district level processes that have nourished and sustained this work over the course of time, and just brings tremendous expertise and strategic thinking to the ways in which districts can leverage the resources they have, ways we can amplify the existing priorities of districts, how we can leverage partnerships effectively. And we created a series of case studies about what that looks like. All of those bullets that we have on the previous slide, you know, thinking about new pathways towards graduation, grade recovery, and helping newcomers that have perhaps had interrupted formalized education get A through G ELA credits, so they have options after high school that they might not have in other ways. Or thinking strategically about how to appoint folks that have been faculty within a Language Explorers program to some of the other district and school level committees that are making decisions that sometimes exclude the perspectives of newcomers and emergent plurilingual students. Anaheim has been incredibly strategic about that work. And so there are lots of those kinds of resources available. And I know Renee will be happy to answer questions about that should they come up. And some of those questions may come up at the upcoming summit. Do you want to talk about that for a minute, Renee?
Yes, my pleasure. So I think I mentioned it earlier. We will have another SLA summit. It is our time where we have an open house where people can come and actually see SLA in action. It's one thing for you to see a video. It's another thing for us to put samples on slides, and it's a whole nother ball game for you to be invited, come into the classrooms, talk to the scholars, talk to the teachers, or the 4 co-educators that exist in the classroom, and then get some capacity built around the pedagogy and the work. And so, yes, happy to talk about all those things with you that day. And if there's time, we'll talk about how we give credit if there's time at the end of this. I don't want to go over time, Sam.
I think
And
that's
so
great. Oh,
yeah, so I think with that, Sam, we'll turn it back to you as we continue sort of the conversation. We can take some questions about our programs, and then we'll talk across them perhaps.
Okay, so I'll start with this question because this is like the $1 million question, right? So how do you make sure that you can use summer programs like this and have some credits given to the scholars? So I'm really lucky to work with a innovative career preparedness systems framework director who was a counselor when she was at the site. So we've worked together. She's basically said, Renee, you know, we can give credit how we want to give credit as long as we write the courses. So what we did is we went ahead and wrote the courses. So there are A through G approved courses. We also have another really great director, Amy Kwan, who's come from up north and then came here, was a junior high school principal. And she, when she was at Western, she decided to do some grade recovery with her summer program. So this idea of, hey, you know, these scholars are working on these great projects, they're multidisciplinary. You teachers, are you willing to do grade recovery and change grades if you see the work as worthy in your opinion? And so that's been a great way for our scholars to be able to recover grades as well. So we use it for SALA, we use it for SLA. So the scholars are earning credits while they're taking these extra classes, and that's very motivating for them as well, because they want to know that there's something in it for them leading towards graduation. I don't think I forgot anything. Oh, and then we kind of do reverse verification too. So let's say they had an F in a class and, you know, they're doing very well, then yes, we'll let that validate the grade. But again, it's a conversation. It's a lot of professional learning that we do and communication with the teachers to make sure they're supportive of this. We don't change any grades without their permission.
There was another question, thank you, Dr. Brian, asking that we had to teach them English. And actually, teachers do teach them English. It's not that there are different ways that you can approach teaching ELD. We think that you can teach ELD in English language development through the lenses of language inclusion, meaning that students already bring literacy skills, and from there you amplify it. If you come, as Dr. Brian said, and you can visit Summer Language Academy, in most instances, the students, they communicate among themselves in English, but we don't want to limit that because we have students that maybe arrived 1 month ago. And that means is they cannot really communicate in English. So I think we have to honor what they already bring and create these spaces when we have these activities. Yes, we teach in English, but with different lenses. And obviously, we want to prepare them for their pathways where they want to go to the university or any pathway they want to follow. So it's how we really rethink about language proficiency and teaching English in that context. So.
Well, and I think if I'll, you know, sort of jump on that to harken back to the poem we began with from Mac, right? When we think about what does it mean for us to raise up our voices in plurilingual, intellectually sophisticated ways. Here he is drawing from his full linguistic repertoire to talk about the ways in which what he wants to see in the world. And what are the ways in which we as educators can say, okay, great, you're using your voices in those ways. Let's look at the complexities. Let's look at the linguistic structures that are represented here. How can you convey these ideas? And we do that with all of the art projects we do. We have students writing artist statements where they're describing, why did you choose this word? What are you trying to represent here? What are the symbols and images in this thing that you're creating? And then just this year, we're just starting, we just launched our new Saturday Language Academy curriculum for this year, in which students are working on identity projects where they're describing their journeys and their trajectories, and then we're linking those to the emphases of the common application essay prompts. which focus on one of the prompts this year has students thinking about their backgrounds, identities, interests, and talents that are so meaningful that their story is incomplete without referencing those. And so how are we helping students think about the ways that they're using their voices to tell their whole stories? And that then is preparing them for all the different pathways that they may have afterwards.
And that's such a good question, and I love those explanations of really that limitation of just focusing on English, but also that challenging necessity of it as well. And one thing I noticed across both presentations and both curricular approaches is there's a focus on academic thinking. There's a focus on art, on self-expression, even on data. And I'm wondering, maybe starting with Annie or Julie, and then going back to the Anaheim Fullerton team, can we talk a little bit about like how does that reinforce language learning to be doing that sort of rigorous, non just English acquisition work?
Yeah, I can start, Annie. You can pick up with that. I think it's so wonderful to hear from you all and the powerful work that you've done. We also piloted this in our newcomer summer program, which is also it is a format for teacher professional development, right? Newcomer teachers are so often teaching alone and don't have that opportunity to be in partnership and co-teaching. And in our summer program, piloting this work, there was some students who were like, I just got here 3 weeks ago. This is my first schooling experience in the US. I will be going to a high school or I will be going into a middle school, but this is my first place. And so from the very beginning of my language identity and what I am able to say in English, what I am able to communicate in my own language, how I am able to socialize as a teenager and flirt and talk and eat lunch, all of that is impacting my both appetite for language acquisition and the way that I feel about it and experience it. And as you overlay content onto that, like, oh my God, in my data science class, we're doing this, and what have I got a graph? All of the ways in which those are connected. So as I think about sort of Annie, the identity piece of that first unit building into their identity as connected to first period, to third period, to what's happening in September, all of that in our bodies, in our mind, and our experience of it is very connected, and it's connected for our students.
Yeah, and I think Sam just highlight, we clearly are all coming from the same pedagogical perspective, but I think just to say we learn languages for purposes in certain circumstances, and we're trying to create that in the classroom. We're not trying to learn a sequence of, English language for some imagined purpose elsewhere. And we really center, it's a thematic project-based curriculum. And I think we all believe that that's the way language is learned and internalized, and it feels meaningful.
Let's ask another question. Today we got to see two great instructional approaches for newcomers at different levels and in different contexts. And what's so great is that people are going to get the opportunity to dive into those materials today, maybe take parts, maybe some will even really implement the models with fidelity. And a lot will also be combining them with other curricular materials. And they'll be thinking, how do I even get started in whether it's in my classroom or whether I'm an administrator or TOSA or principal? How do I navigate this landscape of instructional materials for newcomer students? And I wonder, maybe Renee, you could start us off. In your position, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm lucky. I want to say I'm so fortunate that I walked into Anaheim Union High School District and already established. And I want to give credit to Cynthia Vasquez Pettit. She is a part of Californians Together, part of GABE, and she had already partnered with Ferran Rodriguez Vaz about the time I came on. Then Allison Dover came in as a partner as well. And so I'm so lucky to have this great partnership, and through that be able to work on this great curriculum and have it be a lens through which we look at all of our plurilingual scholars and not only our newcomers. So I think that I'm very fortunate, and I would say that Ferran and Allison, their services are available. So you can reach out to them. 1, 2, you could get the book. 3, you could come to the summit. 4, you can use the models, like you said, Sam, from both districts, and you can work with your local partners. That way you're close. That we're very lucky. Fullerton's very close. So they are in the classrooms with us. They are facilitating debriefing sessions with our teachers during the summer. The professional learning is 12 hours before the summer sessions. I think 3 hours before Summer Language Academy or Saturday Language Academy. So yes, my advice would be to look at our models and then look for partners. And if you can't find partners, reach out to the partners we have here in both Annie and the equity or the and her project, and then some Allison and Ferran.
I would say, if I can add to what Renee said, and that's a good question. It's when we started 10 years ago, can you believe it? It's kind of like this idea, how we responded to the call to really provide programs. And I will add with Annie and Julie said, we need to develop curriculum that is specific for newcomers, but in some cases that we bring pieces, not here, from here and there. We had to sit down and spend time, but there are 3 elements, and Alison, please add later, is number 1 is we develop new curriculum every single year. Number 2, we provide professional learning. And number 3, teachers need time to prep. So the beauty of the Summer Language Academy, the Saturday Language Academy, is the students are there for 3 hours, but teachers work for 5 hours. So have time to prep and time to debrief. Without prepping and without sitting down and analyzing all the things that happen in daily basis, it's not going to happen. It's not fair for teachers to throw curriculum, imagine on your own, and see what happens. No va a pasar. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. And lastly, you need to hire the teachers who are committed to this work, because not all the teachers can do this or they want to do this. So Alison, please.
Well, and I think the thing that I'll add on to that is that structure is intentional, because our goal is not to implement new curriculum. Our goal is to change the way we do schooling so that it doesn't marginalize and silence our newcomer and emergent plurilingual students. And so we're always thinking about how are we building in those sustainable structures. We work with our districts as we bring new districts into summer language academies to think about structurally, what does this look like? How do we ensure that we can work with the contracts, and when necessary, work with unions? And are we defining this as, is this prep time, or is it planning time, or is it coaching time, or how do we have to name it and define it and describe it for each of our districts to ensure that we sort of scale up slowly enough that we have the opportunity to establish those systems that enable programs to thrive. Ferran and I say all the time, we don't want to come in and do some professional development with a district and then we leave and things fall apart. We want districts to really be able to support themselves and develop sustainable practices that are contextually relevant, that respond to the needs and priorities of students and educators in the districts, and that are sustainable when we're not there. We want it to grow and flourish in ways that are really meaningful. And so that's part of the systems we always come back to.
Well, and so just reading between the lines there, I'm hearing that there's not a lot of excitement necessarily about published curriculum, mass market stuff on the market for newcomers. And I'm also hearing that this work can't really be done alone. You can't be done by an individual teacher, and even districts need those partners. I'm wondering, Annie, it looks like we lost Julie for a moment. If you might speak a little bit to that question of, one, like how districts form partnerships with, whether it's outside providers like a nonprofit like yourself or with universities, and maybe 2, what should districts have in mind when they're navigating that instructional materials landscape?
I have to say, Sam, I can't speak. I think some of the other panelists could speak better to that partnership. I know it happened through Oakland and us, but we're, it feels like you have had a partnership for 10 years and it's grown in ways that this is only beginning. But the second piece you're asking about, Sam, is just the way to sort of disseminate and think about how to support teachers enacting the curriculum in the classroom. And I'll just first go back to, the more it can happen in collaboration, the better. So Julie talked about how this summer, the curriculum was piloted, and there were 2 teachers in each classroom. One was a more master teacher, one was a newer teacher. And so there was an opportunity to do some kind of internal professional learning through that. Of course, we had PD before the curriculum was launched. But I think I am hungry, and Jill on the chat was asking, but I'm hungry for more of that kind of collaboration, to be working with districts to understand what's coming out of the classrooms on the ground, and how that can impact the ways that we're thinking about what we developed and how that can morph. The systems, I can't speak to off the cuff, I don't think. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And everyone, Julie sends her best. Her power just went out. And I want to just take a moment to thank our panelists and presenters today. The work you all are doing is wonderful. I'll just say personally, to the CSU, Fullerton, and Anaheim Union team, when I saw you a couple years back at Cave, I was just so thrilled, and it's so wonderful to get to be here with you today. And, you know, I first found Annie's work when I was a baby grad student in 2019, and it's so exciting to see this work being made available for free for everyone. So to everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. All of the materials from today will be sent in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered and posted on the California Newcomer Network website, which is www.calnew.net. We hope that today is helpful, and we're excited to keep showcasing more expert educators and practitioners and researchers. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone.